Before you dive into this profound tale of destiny and devotion, imagine a life changed forever by a single, miraculous discovery. If you believe that family is forged not by blood, but by unconditional love and daily sacrifice, then hit that like button right now. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss more stories that redefine what it means to belong. Tell us in the comments. What city are you listening from today? Chapter 1. The Ocean's Gift. The cold dawn wind swept through Portsmouth as always. David Allen rose before sunrise, as he had for the past 5 years. His bare feet touched the worn wooden floor of his small house. There was no hurry in his movements, only the routine of a man who had learned to live with silence. He dressed slowly, his cotton shirt mended at the elbows, his trousers smelling of salt and labor, his fisherman's boots that knew every stone on the path to the pier. David was a 42-year-old man who seemed to carry 60 years in his eyes. The death of his wife, Clara, and his young son, Leo, had turned him into a shadow of his former self. The town of Portsmouth was still asleep. The stucco houses with tin roofs looked gray under the dim light of dawn. David walked through the empty streets, greeting Mr. Harris, the only other early riser, with a silent nod. Mr. Harris sold coffee and bread near the pier. He was David's only company in those early hours. "Good morning, David," Mr. Harris murmured, handing him a steaming cup of coffee. "Morning," David replied, taking the coffee black. There was never a need for many words between them. The sea was restless that morning. The waves crashed harder against the rocks, and the wind carried a different smell. David knew every mood of the ocean. He had been born in Portsmouth. He had grown up with the sound of the waves as a lullaby. His father had also been a fisherman, and his grandfather before him. He boarded his boat, a small but sturdy vessel he had repaired 1,000 times himself. The engine coughed before starting, like an old man waking with difficulty. David was not impatient. He knew the rhythms of his boat as he knew his own. He sailed out to sea as the sun began to rise on the horizon. The water changed from black to gray, then to a deep blue. David cast his nets in the usual spot, where his father had taught him that fish gathered at dawn. But that morning, something caught his attention. In the distance, floating among the waves, he saw a strange shape. It wasn't marine debris or a log carried by the current. It was something bigger, more defined. David narrowed his eyes and steered his boat towards it. It was a small, light wooden boat, swaying gently on the waves. It looked new, or at least well kept. It had no engine or oars. It simply floated as if it had appeared out of nowhere. As he got closer, David felt his heart quicken. Inside the boat, something was moving, or someone. He tied his boat to the smaller one and carefully peered over. What he saw took his breath away. 2 babies, little girls, perhaps 6 months old, huddled under a thick blanket. One had lighter hair, the other darker, but their faces were almost identical. Twins. Their tiny eyes were open, but they weren't crying. They just looked at him with curiosity, as if they had been waiting for him. David carefully took them, one in each arm. They were warm, well-fed, clean. Someone had taken good care of them until that moment. But how had they gotten there? Where were their parents? At the bottom of the boat, he found a few things: a half-full baby bottle, clean diapers, and something that caught his attention. A small, golden pendant, with 2 letters engraved, A and E. There was also a finer blanket, embroidered with a crest he didn't recognize. David looked out at the horizon. There were no other boats in sight, no signs of a shipwreck or an accident. It was as if the girls had appeared by magic. One of the babies began to make soft cooing sounds, as if trying to speak. David held her closer to his chest and felt something he hadn't felt in years, an immediate protectiveness, an inexplicable love that blossomed unbidden from his wounded heart. "What am I going to do with you?" he murmured, looking at the two little ones. The wind brought him an unexpected answer. The girls calmed down when they heard his voice, as if they knew they were safe. David made a decision that would change his life forever. He took them to his boat, secured the small boat to tow it, and returned to Portsmouth. Mr. Harris was waiting for him at the pier with another cup of coffee, but he froze when he saw what David was carrying in his arms. "What happened?" he asked, approaching quickly. "I found them at sea," David said, his voice hoarse. "They were alone." Mr. Harris looked at the babies, then at David, then at the babies again. "Do you know where they come from?" "No, but I can't leave them like this." That night, after feeding the girls with milk that Mr. Harris had gotten in town, David sat in his empty living room. The babies slept in an improvised crib made of wooden crates and soft blankets. He held the pendant between his fingers. Alice and Emily, he thought. Those names seemed right, as if the girls had whispered them in his ear. 3 days later, as he changed diapers and prepared bottles, as if he had done it all his life, someone knocked on his door. There was no one outside, only a white envelope on the ground. Inside, a handwritten note. "Take care of them. They are yours now. No one will look for them." David read the note twice. Then he burned it in the stove. It didn't matter who had written it. What mattered were the two girls sleeping in his living room, who had arrived from the sea to fill a void he thought impossible to fill. For the first time in 5 years, David Allen truly smiled. Chapter 2. A Father's Unconditional Love. The first few days were a silent chaos. David knew nothing about caring for babies, but he learned quickly. Nights became a dance of bottles, diapers, and whispered songs he invented on the fly. Alice was the most restless. She woke up every 2 hours demanding attention. Emily slept better, but when she cried, she did so with an intensity that woke up the entire neighborhood. Mr. Harris became his lifeline. He arrived every morning with fresh milk, diapers he got in the neighboring town, and advice he remembered from when his own children were small. "You have to register them," he told him one afternoon, as David tried to get Alice to take her bottle. "They can't live without papers." "How can I register them if I don't know where they come from?" David asked, wiping the baby's chin. "You say you found them, that they're orphans. I'll help you with the paperwork." Mr. Harris had contacts at the town's civil registry office. He had known the secretary since they were children, and she didn't ask many questions when they arrived with the twins. David registered them as Alice Allen and Emily Allen, his daughters officially. The town of Portsmouth was divided between curiosity and distrust. Older women whispered in the corners about the solitary fisherman who suddenly appeared with 2 babies. Some said they were the daughters of some adventure he had had in another port. Others, more generous, believed the story of the boat found at sea. Mrs. Peterson, the town midwife, was the first to offer real help. "These girls need proper clothes," she said, knocking on the door one morning with a basket full of tiny dresses. "And you need to learn how to make them baby food." David humbly accepted the help. Mrs. Peterson taught him how to bathe the girls, how to recognize when they had a fever, how to prepare food for them when they were old enough. She showed him how to sew on fallen buttons and how to mend torn knees in trousers. The months passed like gentle waves. David adapted his entire routine to the girls' needs. He went fishing very early and returned before noon. Mrs. Peterson or Mr. Harris looked after them while he worked. In the afternoons, he sat on the beach with the twins in his arms, teaching them the names of the seagulls and the different sound each type of wave made. Alice was the first to walk. At 10 months, she let go of the kitchen table and walked straight towards David, who was preparing lunch. Emily followed her 2 weeks later, but more carefully, studying each step before taking it. "They're different, but they complement each other," Mrs. Peterson told him one afternoon, watching the girls play in the sand. "Alice is the fire. Emily is the water." It was true. Alice was brave and curious, always getting into trouble. Emily was observant and careful, but when she made a decision, there was no changing her mind. By the time they turned 2, they were already part of Portsmouth's landscape. The fishermen greeted them by name when David took them to the pier. The market ladies saved sweet fruits for them. The town's children included them in their beach games. David had learned to braid Alice's hair and make pigtails in Emily's. He had learned to cook beyond fish and rice. He had learned to read stories with different voices for each character, although he himself had barely finished primary school. The nights were his favorite time. After dinner, he lit a kerosene lamp and sat in the rocking chair that had been Clara's. The girls snuggled up beside him as he invented stories about good mermaids and brave fishermen, about hidden treasures at the bottom of the sea, and whales that sang love songs. One night, when the twins were 3 years old, Alice asked him something that caught him off guard. "Dad, why don't we have a mom?" David stopped rocking. Emily also looked at him, waiting for an answer. Your mom had to leave before you met her," he finally said. "But she asked me to take very good care of you." "Is she coming back?" Emily asked. "I don't know, my love, but in the meantime, here I am." Alice snuggled closer to him. "It's okay, Dad. You're enough." Those words were etched in David's heart. For the first time since Clara and Leo's deaths, he felt whole. It wasn't the same family he had lost, but it was his family, real and true. The following years flowed like the tide. The girls grew up strong and happy, running on the beach, helping fold fishing nets, learning to swim in the calm waters near the shore. David aged gracefully, smiling more than he had smiled in his entire adult life. The silent, sad man who had found the babies at sea had become a loving father who sang while cooking, and who knew exactly how to comfort a broken heart or celebrate a small triumph. Portsmouth had completely accepted the Allen family. No one asked about the twins' origin anymore. They were simply David's daughters, the girls from the sea, as much a part of the community as the rocks and the palm trees. Chapter 3. Unveiling the past. At 15 years old, Alice and Emily Allen were the prettiest girls in Portsmouth. Alice had inherited a fiery personality that led her to minor troubles, like coming home late or arguing with teachers. Emily was more reflective, always with a book in her hands and complicated questions on her lips. It was Emily who found the pendant. David had kept it in a tin box, along with the embroidered blanket and some old papers. He had never shown it to the girls, but he hadn't hidden it very carefully either. That Saturday afternoon, while he was mending nets in the yard, Emily went up to the attic looking for Christmas decorations. "Dad," she called, coming down the stairs with the pendant in her hand. "What is this?" David felt his stomach clench. He had known this moment would come, but he hadn't prepared for it. "Come here, my love. Call your sister too." Alice ran in from the kitchen, where she had been trying to make cookies with questionable results. Seeing the pendant in Emily's hands, her eyes lit up with curiosity. "It's very pretty. Whose is it?" David sat in his favorite chair, the one he had placed by the window to see the sea. The girls settled on the floor in front of him, as they had since they were little, to listen to his stories. "It's yours," he finally said. "I found it with you the day I took you from the sea." "Ours?" Alice asked, touching the engraved letters. "A and E, Alice and Emily." "Exactly. That's why I named you those names." Emily studied the pendant more closely. "But Dad, this looks expensive. Look how the gold shines. And these letters are very well made." "Yes, my love. Whoever gave them to you loved you very much. Silence spread through the living room. Alice was the first to ask the question they both had in mind. "You never knew who our real parents were?" The word real hurt more than David had expected. "No, Alice, I never knew. A letter appeared days later, but it didn't say much. Just to take care of you." "Do you have the letter?" Emily asked. "I burned it. I thought it was for the best." The twins looked at each other. One of those moments of silent communication that "Have you never wanted to look for them?" Alice asked. "I mean, to find out who we really are." "You are my daughters," David said with more firmness than he had used in years. "You are Alice and Emily Allen. That's what matters." But the seeds of curiosity had already been planted. In the following days, the twins began to ask subtle questions around town. They asked Mr. Harris if he remembered anything strange from 15 years ago. They talked to Mrs. Peterson about abandoned babies. They looked through old newspapers in the neighboring town's library. They found nothing, but they didn't give up. Meanwhile, 200 miles away in the city of Brighton, Charles Davies woke up one morning with the decision to hire a new private detective. Charles owned a chain of hotels he had inherited from his father. His wife, Eleanor, ran a charity foundation. They lived in an elegant mansion in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, but no amount of money had been able to fill the void left by the loss of their twin daughters. They had been born after years of failed attempts. Alice May and Emily Rose Davies had been the miracle that completed their family. But at 6 months of age, the girls disappeared from their room one night. There were no signs of violence. There were no ransom demands. They simply vanished. The police had investigated for months. They hired private detectives. They offered huge rewards. They appeared on television asking for information. Nothing worked. Over time, the search had cooled. Charles and Eleanor continued with their lives, but never stopped hoping. Every year, on the girl's birthday, they lit 2 candles and made the same wish. Now, 15 years later, Charles had read about new facial recognition technologies and digital reconstruction. He had decided to try once more. "Detective Riley," he said on the phone, "I want you to use everything you have available. Computers, databases, whatever it takes. My daughters are alive. I feel it in my heart." Detective Riley was a meticulous man who had worked on missing children cases for 20 years. He had access to computer programs that could show what a baby would look like as they grew up and could search databases across the country. "Mr. Davies," he told him, 15 years have passed. It's a long time. I don't care. Find them." As the detective began his work in Brighton, in Portsmouth, the twins had made their own discovery. On the computer at the internet cafe, after hours of searching, they found a newspaper article from 15 years ago. The headline read, "Twins Vanish from Mansion in Brighton." The article included photographs of Charles and Eleanor Davies and a detailed description of the missing babies. 6 months old, identical twins. One had slightly lighter hair than the other, but what took their breath away was a small photograph at the end of the article. It showed some personal items belonging to the babies, a golden pendant with the letters AE, and a blanket with an embroidered crest. "Emily," Alice whispered, "that's our pendant." Emily couldn't speak. She just pointed at the screen with a trembling hand. They printed the article and returned home in complete silence. The bus ride back to Portsmouth felt eternal. David was repairing his boat when he saw them arrive. A glance at their faces told him that something had changed forever. "What happened?" he asked. Putting down his tools, Alice handed him the printed sheet without a word. David read slowly, moving his lips as he did when he concentrated hard. His face grew paler as he understood what he held in his hands. "Dad," Emily finally said, "did you know about this?" "No, my love. I never saw this article. I never knew your real names. Alice May and Emily Rose Davies." Alice read aloud. "Those are our real names." David sat heavily on a log he used as a bench. "What do you want to do?" he asked. The twins looked at each other. They had talked about this throughout the ride home. "We want to meet them," Emily said. "But we don't want to leave you. You are our dad," Alice added. "That will never change." The next day, Detective Riley and Charles Davies arrived in Portsmouth in a black car that attracted the attention of the entire town. They asked for David Allen at Mr. Harris's shop. "Why are you looking for him, Mr. Harris asked suspiciously. "It's a family matter," Riley replied. Mr. Harris directed them to David's house, but followed them at a distance. In small towns, everyone looks out for everyone. When they knocked on the door, it was David who opened it. He had been waiting for them. "Are you David Allen?" Riley asked. "Yes. We need to talk to you about the girls you found 15 years ago." Charles couldn't hold back any longer. "Where are my daughters?" David invited them in. The twins were sitting in the living room, holding hands, waiting. When Charles saw their faces, he froze. He didn't need DNA tests or scientific confirmations. His father's heart immediately recognized his daughters. "Alice, Emily," he whispered. The girls slowly stood up. They could see in Charles's eyes the same recognition they felt. "Are you our biological dad?" Alice asked. Charles nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Your mom is home, waiting. She's been waiting for 15 years. Emily looked at David, who had remained at the entrance of the living room. "What's going to happen now?" she asked. "I don't know, my love," David replied. "But we'll find out together." Riley took photographs of the pendant and the blanket to confirm the evidence. He explained that they would need to do DNA tests to make everything legal and official. "But in my heart," Charles said, "I have no doubts. You are my daughters." That night, for the first time in 15 years, the twins fell asleep knowing exactly who they were and where they came from, but also knowing that their lives were about to change forever. Chapter 4. Two worlds collide. The DNA test confirmed what everyone already knew in their hearts. Alice and Emily Allen were, without a doubt, Alice May and Emily Rose Davies. 15 years of searching had ended, but a situation that no one knew how to handle was just beginning. The family court judge, an older man named Judge Thompson, had seen difficult cases in his career, but never anything like this. Two fathers who loved the same girls, two completely different worlds, and two teenagers caught in the middle. "The law is clear," he explained in his office with everyone present. "The minors must return with their biological parents, but the circumstances are special. I propose a gradual transition." Eleanor Davies had cried non-stop since she saw her daughters. She was an elegant woman, with brown hair and kind eyes, who had spent 15 years visiting churches and praying for the return of her babies. Now she had them in front of her, grown into beautiful young women, but also strangers. "We just want to get to know them," she said, her voice broken. "We don't want to hurt them." Charles had been more direct in his grief, but also more careful. He understood that the girls were not blank slates who could simply be moved. They were complete individuals, with their own stories, with a father who had raised them with love. "What do you want?" he asked the twins directly. Alice, as always, was the first to speak. "We want to meet you. We want to know where we come from." "But Dad?" "David is our dad too. He raised us," Emily added. "He taught us to walk, to read, to swim. He took care of us when we were sick. He's our dad." David had remained silent throughout the meeting. The weight of the situation overwhelmed him. On the one hand, he wanted the best for his daughters. On the other, The idea of losing them terrified him. The judge decided that the girls would spend weekends with the Davises for 2 months to get to know each other gradually. Afterward, they would evaluate the situation. The first Friday, Charles and Eleanor arrived in Portsmouth to pick up the twins. They brought a large, comfortable car that contrasted brutally with the town's dirt streets. David had prepared a small suitcase for each: simple clothes, toothbrushes, Emily's favorite books, Alice's handmade bracelets. "Are you going to be okay?" Alice asked him, hugging him tightly. "I'll be fine," he lied. "Have fun. Get to know them." The drive to Brighton was silent. The twins looked out the windows as the landscape changed from fishing villages to green fields, then to the outskirts of the big city. The Davies mansion left them speechless. It was a 2-story house with perfect gardens, a shimmering pool under the sun, and enormous windows, overlooking an inner courtyard with fountains. Everything was immaculate, as if from a magazine. "This is your room," Eleanor said, opening a second-floor door. The room had remained exactly as it was 15 years ago. 2 cribs converted into single beds, toys that had never been touched, baby clothes carefully stored in drawers. Alice felt a knot in her throat. "You never changed anything." "We couldn't," Charles replied. "We always knew you'd come back." That first night, they dined in an elegant dining room with silver cutlery and cloth napkins. The food was delicious, but the twins barely touched it. Everything was too different, too formal. "Tell us about yourselves," Eleanor asked. "What do you like to do? What are your favorite subjects in school?" Emily talked about her books, how she liked to read on the beach while listening to the waves. Alice told about afternoons helping David with the fishing nets, about swimming in the sea before dawn. Charles and Eleanor listened attentively, but also with a certain sadness. The life their daughters described was completely alien to them. On Saturday, they tried activities together. They went to the city's largest shopping mall, bought new clothes for the girls, and had lunch at an elegant restaurant. In the afternoon, they visited the private club where the Davieses played tennis on weekends. Everything was beautiful, comfortable, expensive, but the twins felt like fish out of water. "Do you always live like this?" Alice asked that night as they prepared for bed. "Like what?" Eleanor replied. "So elegant. Don't you ever get tired?" Eleanor didn't know how to answer. On Sunday morning, Emily woke up crying. She had dreamed of David, alone in the Portsmouth house eating his breakfast in silence. "Can I call him?" she asked. Charles immediately handed her his cell phone. "Dad," Emily said when David answered. "Are you okay?" "You okay?" "I'm fine, my love. How are you two doing?" "We miss you." "I miss you too, but it's okay. Get to know them. Enjoy." When it was time to return to Portsmouth that Sunday, the twins felt both relieved and guilty. The Davieses were good people. They clearly loved them, but it felt forced, artificial. David was waiting for them at the pier, as he had done all his life. When he saw them get out of the car, he smiled, but his eyes were sad. "How was it?" he asked. "Different," Alice replied. "Very different." That night, as they ate fried fish and rice with beans on chipped plates, the twins felt at home for the first time in 3 days. But they knew they would have to return next weekend, and the next, and the next. They were caught between 2 worlds that loved them, but didn't know how to love them together. Chapter 5. The Unforeseen Twist. After 2 months of weekends in Brighton, the twins still felt divided. The Davieses had done everything possible to get to know them and make them feel comfortable. They brought music teachers to teach them piano. They hired English tutors. They bought them expensive clothes that the girls only wore out of courtesy. But every Sunday night when they returned to Portsmouth, it was as if they could breathe again. Eleanor noticed it first. "They're not happy with us," she told Charles one night, after the girls had been silent throughout dinner. "It will take time for them to adapt," Charles replied. But deep down, he knew his wife was right. "Charles, look at them. When they talk about their life in Portsmouth, their eyes light up. When they're here, they seem to be acting." It was true. The twins were polite and affectionate with the Davises, but there was a distance they didn't know how to close. 15 years of differences couldn't be resolved with weekends and good intentions. The situation became complicated when the judge decided it was time to make a permanent decision. "The minors must establish permanent residence," he informed them in a new meeting. "They cannot continue living in two places indefinitely." David felt his world collapse. He knew that legally he had no rights. Charles and Eleanor were the biological parents. They had resources. They could offer the girls opportunities he could never provide. "I understand," he simply said, but Alice didn't understand anything. "Why do we have to choose?" she burst out. "Why can't we have two families?" "Because the law doesn't work that way, my love," the judge explained patiently. "They need stability. They need a permanent home." Emily, always more thoughtful, asked the question everyone feared. "What if we choose to stay with Dad David?" The silence in the office was painful. "The economic and educational circumstances would be a factor," the judge responded carefully. Charles understood the message. He and Eleanor had all the legal resources to win custody if they wanted to fight for it. That night in the Brighton mansion, Charles and Eleanor had the most difficult conversation of their lives. "We can't force them to be here," Eleanor said. "They'll resent us forever." "But they're our daughters," Charles replied. "We lost them once. I can't lose them again." "Charles, look at me. Would you rather have them here but unhappy, or find a way for them to be happy, even if it's not what we expected?" Charles didn't answer immediately. He had dreamed for 15 years of getting his daughters back. He had imagined family dinners, vacations together, graduations, weddings. He had imagined rebuilding the lost years. But the girls he had recovered were not blank babies that could be molded. They were complete people, with their own stories, with a father who had raised them with love. The next day, Charles and Eleanor did something unexpected. Instead of going to the judge's office, they drove to Portsmouth. They arrived unannounced, just as they had the first time. But this time, they weren't there to claim anything. David was at the pier, mending nets as always. The twins were at school. "Mr. Allen," Charles said, "we need to talk to you." David invited them into his house, made coffee in chipped mugs, and sat down to listen. "We want to propose something to you," Eleanor said. "Something that might sound crazy." David waited. "Come and live with us," Charles continued. "You and the girls, all together." David thought he had misheard. "Excuse me, we have a big house," Eleanor explained. "We can build an independent apartment for you. The girls could have the best of both worlds. The father who raised them, and us, who brought them into the world." David was silent for a long time, looking out the window at the sea. "It's very generous," he finally said. "But I can't." "Why not?" Charles asked. "Because this is my place," David replied. "The sea is my home. It was the sea that brought me my daughters. I can't leave here." "But the girls will make their own decision," David interrupted. "And I will respect it, even if it breaks my heart." Eleanor began to cry. "We don't want to separate them from you. We just want to be a family." "We already are a family," David said softly, "just not in the traditional way." Charles stood up and walked to the window. From there, he could see the pier where his wife had waited so many years for news of their daughters, where David had spent 15 years working to support them. "What do you suggest then?" he asked. "Let Alice and Emily decide," David replied, "without pressure from any of us. Let them choose where they want to live, and let's all respect their decision." When the twins arrived from school that afternoon, they found their 3 parents sitting in the living room, waiting for them. "What happened?" Alice immediately asked. "Nothing bad," Eleanor replied. We just want you to decide what you want to do." For the first time in months, the options were clear. They could stay in Portsmouth with David or move to Brighton with the Davieses, but they had to choose. "Can we think about it?" Emily asked. Of course, all three adults replied at the same time. That night, the twins walked on the beach until very late, talking about the future, about family, about what they really wanted for their lives. The decision they would make would change everything forever. Chapter 6. A family forged by love. The twins took a week to make their decision. A week of long walks on the beach, whispered conversations after David fell asleep, and sleepless nights staring at their bedroom ceiling. Finally, on a Saturday morning, they asked to meet with everyone. "We want to stay here," Alice announced, taking Emily's hand. "Portsmouth is our home. Dad, David is our dad." Charles felt as if he had been punched in the stomach, but he tried to maintain composure. "Are you sure?" Eleanor asked with a broken voice. "Yes," Emily replied. "But we want to keep seeing you. We want you to be part of our lives, just here, in our place." The Davieses accepted the decision with pain, but with dignity. They promised to visit Portsmouth regularly and maintain constant contact with the girls. For a moment, it seemed that everything had been resolved. But life had other plans. 3 months after the decision, David began to feel unwell. At first, he attributed it to fatigue. He was 7 years old. He had worked at sea all his life. It was normal for his body to start protesting. But mornings became more difficult. He struggled to get up. He ran out of breath when climbing the stairs. And some nights, he woke up with chest pain. Mr. Harris was the first to notice. "David, you look very pale," he told him one morning as they drank coffee on the pier. "Are you feeling well?" "Just a little tired," David replied, but his voice sounded weak. "You should go to the doctor." "I don't have time for doctors." But Mr. Harris had known David for years. He knew when something was really wrong. Without telling his friend, Mr. Harris spoke to the twins. "Your dad isn't well," he told them after school. "He needs to see a doctor, but he's too stubborn to go alone." Alice and Emily looked at each other, alarmed. They had noticed that David was eating less, that he fell asleep in his chair after dinner, that he no longer whistled while working on his nets. "What can we do?" Emily asked. "Convince him. You're the only ones he listens to." That night, the twins confronted David. "Dad, we want you to go to the doctor," Alice said directly. "I'm fine, my love. Just a little tired." "No, you're not fine," Emily insisted. "We've seen you. Something is hurting you." David sighed. He couldn't lie to them. Well, maybe a checkup wouldn't hurt. The doctor in the neighboring town didn't have good news. "Mr. Allen, your heart is very weak. You need special care. Medicines that we don't have here. And you need to rest." "How serious is it?" Alice asked, who had insisted on accompanying him. The doctor looked at David, then at the girls. "It's serious. He needs constant medical attention, preferably in a city where there are better hospitals." The drive back to Portsmouth was silent. David drove his old pickup truck while the twins processed the information. "Dad," Emily finally said, "you have to call Charles and Eleanor." "What for?" "Because in Brighton there are better doctors, better hospitals." "I'm not leaving Portsmouth," David replied firmly. "This is my place." "Your place is with us," Alice cried, "and we need you alive." David stopped the truck by the side of the road. For the first time in 15 years, the twins saw him cry. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I'm scared of leaving here and losing you. I'm afraid that in that big house, you'll realize you can live better without me." Emily unbuckled her seatbelt and hugged David from behind. "Dad, you taught us that family isn't where you live. It's the people who love you." "Charles and Eleanor don't want to replace you," Alice added. "They want to help you. They want to help us." That night, with trembling hands, David dialed the Davieses' number. "Charles," he said when he answered the phone, "I need help." Charles and Eleanor arrived in Portsmouth the next day. When they saw David's condition, they were alarmed. "Why didn't you call us sooner?" Eleanor asked. "Because I'm a stubborn old man," David replied with a weak smile. "You're not old," Charles said, "and we're going to make sure you're not stubborn either." In 2 days, they had arranged everything. David would see the best cardiologists in Brighton. He would temporarily move to the mansion until his health stabilized. "Only until I feel better," David insisted. "Only until you feel better," everyone agreed, knowing it would probably be permanent. On moving day, all of Portsmouth gathered at the pier to say goodbye. Mr. Harris hugged his old friend with tears in his eyes. "Take care, brother. Take care of the town while I'm gone." The twins packed their most prized possessions: books, photographs, seashells they had collected for years. But the most important thing they carried was the certainty that they were going together. As the car drove away from Portsmouth, David looked out the rear window until the sea disappeared on the horizon. He didn't know if he would ever see it again, but he knew that as long as he had his daughters nearby, he would be home. Chapter 7. A New Kind of Family. The Davies mansion was transformed in a week. Charles and Eleanor had hired decorators to adapt the ground floor as an independent apartment for David. They installed a small kitchen where he could prepare his simple meals, a living room with large windows overlooking the garden, and a bedroom with a view of the small artificial lake in the courtyard. But what moved David most were the details the twins had added without anyone noticing. They had filled the room with things from Portsmouth. The fishing nets he had been repairing hung on the walls as decoration. The seashells they had collected together for years were arranged on wooden shelves. A framed photograph showed the house by the sea where they had lived for 15 years. "Do you like it?" Alice asked nervously. David sat on the new bed, which was more comfortable than anything he had ever had in his life, and looked around. "It's perfect," he finally said. "You brought the sea with me." The first few days were difficult. David woke up at 5 in the morning out of habit, but there was no sea waiting for him. He walked through the perfectly manicured garden, missing the sound of the waves and the cry of the seagulls. Eleanor found him one morning sitting by the artificial lake, looking at the still water. "Do you miss the sea much?" she asked, sitting beside him. "All my life I've listened to the waves," David replied. "Now the silence is very loud." Eleanor understood. That afternoon, she hired a technician who installed hidden speakers around the lake. Since then, the soft sound of recorded waves accompanied David during his morning walks. Charles, for his part, had made a surprising decision. He restructured his work schedule to spend more time at home. He wanted to get to know the man who had raised his daughters, to understand how he had done it so well. "Teach me," he told him one afternoon, as David fixed a broken chair. "Teach me how to be the father they need." David looked at him in surprise. "You are already their father." "I'm their biological father," Charles corrected. "But you're the one who knows them, who knows what makes them laugh, what worries them, how to comfort them when they're sad." Thus began an unexpected friendship. Charles learned that Alice needed constant challenges so as not to get bored, and that Emily needed alone time to process her emotions. He learned that they both liked to cook together on Sundays, and that they hated being compared to each other. Eleanor, meanwhile, had found in David the confidant she had never had. She told him about the years of pain after losing the girls, about how she had filled the void by helping other children through her foundation. "I never stopped being a mother," she told him one night, as the 5 of them had dinner together. "But I didn't know how to be one to my own daughters." "Being a mother isn't something you learn from books," David replied. "You learn it by living every day." The months passed faster than expected. David's medical treatment worked better than they had hoped. His heart strengthened, he regained weight, and his natural color returned to his cheeks. But the most important thing was to see how the relationship among all of them flourished. Charles and Eleanor learned to relax, to be less formal. They began to have dinner in the kitchen instead of the elegant dining room. They bought more comfortable furniture for the living room. Eleanor learned to cook simple dishes that the girls liked. The twins, for their part, began to open up to their biological parents. They told them about their dreams, their fears, their plans for the future. Alice wanted to study marine biology. Emily dreamed of being a writer. "Can we keep the Allen surname too?" Emily asked one night during dinner. "How?" Charles asked. "Alice Davies Allen, Emily Davies Allen. That way we have both families in our name." Charles and Eleanor looked at each other. It wasn't something they had considered, but it made perfect sense. "I think that's an excellent idea," Charles said. David said nothing, but his eyes filled with tears. The night of the twins' March 16th birthday, they held a special dinner. It wasn't in the formal dining room, but in the garden by the lake where David walked every morning. Charles had prepared a speech, but when the time came, the words didn't come out as he had planned. 16 years ago, we lost our daughters," he finally said. "But a year ago, we found something better. We found a complete family." Eleanor stood up and hugged David. "Thank you for taking care of them until we could find them again." "Thank you for letting me be part of your lives," David replied. Alice and Emily looked at each other and smiled. They no longer felt divided between two worlds. They had found a way to live in one, where everyone fit. That night, as the twins slept in their rooms on the second floor, and Charles and Eleanor in theirs, David sat by the artificial lake. The sound of the recorded waves calmed him, but for the first time in months, what comforted him most was not the memory of the sea. It was the sound of a house full of family. Chapter 8. Home is where the heart is. 6 months later, life in the Davies mansion had found its natural rhythm. It no longer felt like a large, formal house, but like a home where 5 people had learned to love each other in imperfect but genuine ways. David had become the silent heart of the family. He rose early, as always, but now prepared coffee for everyone. Charles had learned to enjoy those quiet mornings, sitting by the lake, while David told him stories of the sea, or taught him to distinguish the different types of clouds that signaled a storm. Eleanor had discovered she had a talent for gardening. Together with David, she had transformed a section of the patio into a small vegetable patch where they grew tomatoes, cilantro, and chili peppers. It was an activity that relaxed them both, working the earth with their hands while talking about the girls. The twins had blossomed in different but complementary ways. Alice had started diving classes on weekends, preparing to study marine biology at university. Charles had arranged for a private instructor to come to the house to teach her in the pool, although she insisted it wasn't the same as the open sea. Emily had filled her room with books and notebooks where she wrote stories. Eleanor had hired a literature professor to help her hone her technique, but the best stories she wrote were always about brave fishermen and girls who came from the sea. One Saturday morning, as they had breakfast in the kitchen, they had completely abandoned the formal dining room. A letter arrived that would change everyone's mood. It was from Mr. Harris. "Dear David and family," the letter, written in a trembling hand, began. "I hope you are all well. I am writing to tell you that the town has decided to do something special. We are going to build a monument on the pier where you found the girls. A plaque that says, 'Here the sea returned what the heart needed.' We want you to come for the inauguration next month. Portsmouth is not the same without you." David read the letter aloud, and when he finished, everyone fell silent. "Do you want to go?" Charles finally asked. "Yes," David replied without hesitation, "but only if we all go together." The trip to Portsmouth was planned as a family adventure. They rented a house near the pier to stay for a week. Charles and Eleanor were nervous. It would be the first time they visited the place where their daughters had grown up. When they arrived in town, all of Portsmouth was waiting for them. Mr. Harris had aged, but he smiled like a child. Mrs. Peterson hugged the twins as if they were her own grandchildren. The fishermen who had known the girls since they were little greeted them with genuine affection. Charles and Eleanor were met with curiosity at first, but when they saw how they treated David and the girls, the town immediately accepted them. The monument inauguration ceremony was simple, but emotional. The entire community gathered at the pier while the town priest blessed the bronze plaque. "Here the sea returned what the heart needed," Mr. Harris read aloud. David walked to the exact spot where he had found the boat 15 years ago. The twins stood by his sides, holding his hands. "Do you remember that day?" Alice asked. "Like it was yesterday," David replied. "Two babies who changed my life forever, who changed all of our lives," Charles added, placing his hand on David's shoulder. That night they had dinner at the house by the sea, where David had raised the girls. The house was exactly the same, cared for by the neighbors during his absence. After dinner, the five of them walked along the beach under the stars. David stopped at a particular spot, where a large rock extended into the water. "This is where we used to come to talk when they had problems," he told Charles and Eleanor. "This is where they told me they wanted to find you." They all sat on the rock, listening to the real sound of the waves for the first time in months. "You know what's strangest?" Emily suddenly said. "I no longer feel like I have to choose between families. I feel like we've always been one family that took a while to become complete." Eleanor took David's hand. "Thank you for sharing them with us." "Thank you for sharing yourselves with us," David replied. On their last day in Portsmouth, as they packed to return to Brighton, David made a decision. Instead of taking memories of the sea, he decided to leave something. He took a photograph of the five of them together, taken during the ceremony, and placed it in a wooden frame he had carved years ago. The photograph showed an imperfect but complete family, a fisherman who had learned to live in the city, parents who had learned to share their daughters, and two young women who had discovered that love has no limits or strict definitions. Below the photograph, David wrote in his neat handwriting, "Family is where you are loved, not where you were born." He left the frame on the windowsill overlooking the sea so that any future visitor would know that house had been filled with love. When they returned to Brighton, the Davies mansion welcomed them as what it truly was, their home. David sat that night by the artificial lake, listening to the recorded sound of the waves. But for the first time in his life, he didn't feel nostalgia for the sea. The sea had fulfilled its purpose. It had given him a family. Now it lived peacefully within his heart, knowing that he had found where to rest forever. This beautiful narrative reminds us that true family is not always born of blood, but of unconditional love and daily sacrifices. The transformation of a solitary fisherman into a devoted father, and how two completely different worlds learned to unite for the sake of the girls, is a powerful testament that love can overcome any obstacle. If this story touched your heart as much as it touched ours, don't forget to like it and share it with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to find or create a family. The emotional journey of the boat in the sea teaches us that the most difficult decisions sometimes lead to the most beautiful endings. Which moment in the story impacted you the most? Was it when David found the babies? When the twins discovered their origin? Or perhaps that ending where everyone learned that love multiplies when it's shared? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this heartfelt narrative, subscribe to the channel for more stories that celebrate the deepest human bonds, and tell us what country you're watching from.